Welcome everybody to this Bright Idea AMA. This week we have Luke is back again from OneHive because OneHive moves very fast. So we've got a lot of cool updates, cool things happening with OneHive. Some of them relate to Bright ID, and Luke is going to tell us about some of those things. And then we'll have, as always, an opportunity for questions from everybody who's here. So with that, I will hand it over to Luke, who's the founder of OneHive.
Hey, thanks, Adam. So I have some presentations I could do, or like just talk briefly about like some of the new things, and then get into an like AMA style thing. When I talked to Pazlar, he was saying it was an AMA, so I didn't really prepare anything specifically.
Oh yeah, it's definitely an AMA. So yes, but if you just want to tell us some of the things that you want us to ask about, then yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I mean the thing that I think is really exciting, like right now, because it's happening this week. We're finally launching Celeste. So this has kind of been a really big important update for us that has been planned for a while. And it's really exciting that it should be going live. The vote appears to be passing. It should end later today, and then there's a 2-day grace period. And this will be like a core upgrade to kind of the Honey token like economics, the voting process, and it will introduce like Honey staking using this dispute resolution protocol called Celeste, which we've integrated Bright ID into. And it's actually like a really key part of the mechanism design that we were able to use Bright ID to prevent people from staking excessive amounts on an individual basis. And I'm really excited about that. Like this is, I think, one of the first Bright ID integrations that has like a really strong dependency, like on an ongoing basis for a protocol. I'm not sure, I haven't followed all of them, but really excited about what it's going to enable us to do, and it'll serve as sort of a check and balance among our like voting process that is stake based, and kind of our core values, which are called the like community covenant, and kind of individual like more democratic representation of what we're all about. So yeah, I would love to answer any questions on that. We're also like adopting this dynamic issuance policy for Honey that we've talked about for a while in this vote, because it involved quite a bit of like core upgrades to the core contract. So we wanted to like bundle everything together so we could get lots of eyes on them and stuff. So we're excited that that's happening as well. And we are then transitioning our efforts with the Celeste launch into Gardens on the like DAO side, and Quest, which will be Celeste integrations that are coming up. Gardens will enable people to issue community tokens and use conviction voting, and like have their own kind of covenant and their own proposal process and their own common pool, and not have to like fork any code. And it'll kind of integrate into sort of a social network of DAOs with shared user profiles and stuff on the onehive.org domain. So we're excited for that. And then we have this product called Quest that will also integrate with Celeste, where people can provide a like human readable like English document explaining like a thing to do, get that funded via like a DAO proposal, and then perform work and kind of ask like for funding from that pool. And it's cool because the people that are creating the Quest, the people that actually write down what you need to do and scope the work, get a cut of the eventual payment. So I think it'll be like a pretty significant and useful upgrade to like DAO proposal processes and like a different spin on kind of bounties and decentralized work. And we'll use Celeste as well for disputes over whether work was actually completed or not. So we're excited about that as well.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So that's a lot of new stuff that's happening. Does anyone already have questions about some piece of that they would like to learn more about?
Hey, I'm wondering, when you say that the vote is passing, Is this directly triggering the update of the contracts and everything, or is this just a vote and then some people need to manually perform the on-chain updates?
It is a direct vote. If things go wrong, things will blow up. We already are at like the point of kind of real decentralization where like the DAO is the source of truth. So we actually, the voting process was really interesting because it's doing a lot of stuff, and it's hard when you're voting on something to understand what it's doing. So I actually did a write up in the forum, kind of walking through how you can validate things. We used RadSpec descriptions that like read the contracts in the front end. You can kind of look through the like Aragon org to verify all the addresses are correct. Yeah, so there's like a forum post that goes through everything for people to review. Yeah, it's an on-chain vote. It's effectively going to migrate the token controller, like the contract that controls the Honey token, to a new Aragon organization, and then move all of the Honey that's in our like common pool contract, it's controlled by conviction voting, into a new contract. And those new contracts are part of a new Aragon organization that includes the new disputable voting app and the new disputable conviction voting app. So once that goes through, there's like a 2-day execution delay. So hopefully Saturday at some point is when things will switch over. And we'll have to do some deployments on the front end side to make the front end point to the new versions of everything. And hopefully all that goes super smoothly, but it's exciting. And we actually had 10% of the supply required, and I think we're at like 13 or 14, which is pretty cool because not only that, but if you vote yes on these proposals, your token balance gets locked until the vote ends. So it's like, we actually discourage voting yes on proposals, and we're still seeing like significant participation, not just in terms of like the amount, but also the number of people. I think there's, let me check the exact number on the vote right now.
Sasha said it's up to 16%.
Nice. Yeah, it's 16%. And then I think we also show the number of addresses supporting it. And there's already 100 votes. So 100 unique people. Well, I don't know if they're unique, but presumably most of them are unique that have voted, because we don't use Bright ID for the votes. We use Bright ID for Celeste.
Impressive.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to get people to vote when they don't really have to pay anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a nice thing about being on XDAI chain. So does anyone have any questions about some of the changes that Luke mentioned that they already know they have? I have a question, but I am waiting to see who else has questions.
Do you want to talk about what Celeste actually is and what it means to have disputable voting, how that process works?
Sure. If I can share my screen, I've got some slides that have like a diagram that like actually will help me explain this a lot better. Let me try and do that really quick.
Yeah, please do.
Let's see, share screen. And okay. Does that show up for you guys? Are you seeing?
Looks great for me.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so we're still trying to figure out like exactly how to explain these things. And so any feedback on anything is highly appreciated. But Celeste is a fork of Aragon Court, which was kind of positioned as this like decentralized court thing. And we're kind of moving away from that, even though there's a lot of like dynamics and analogies of that make sense. And we're calling it a subjective oracle designed to resolve disputes arising in optimistic games. And that's kind of like a bunch of jargony mouthful. So like first, you got to talk about optimistic games. Hold on. I've got this like you are sharing your screen thing right in the middle of what I'm looking at. But essentially an optimistic game is where you put up like a deposit to try and perform an action on chain. And we assume the like smart contract assumes that that action's valid unless somebody else comes and says, hey, no, that's not a valid action. So we optimistically assume that it's going to go through unless somebody speaks up or raises their hand and says otherwise. In the event somebody does, they challenge it and they put up a deposit on the other side. And the original proposer has the opportunity to say, okay, yeah, you're right, I made a mistake. I'm going to back off and withdraw my action from consideration and kind of resolve the dispute before it goes any further. Or they can escalate it and then it gets resolved by the process, like the Celeste process in this case, or some arbitration process. And we see optimistic games all over the place in Ethereum. Optimistic rollups are an optimistic game where you have the arbitration process be a bunch of computation that happens on layer 1, but you don't want to do it most of the time because it's really, really expensive. So you can use this for scalability reasons, or in the case of Celeste and kind of this, the type of games that we're kind of focused on, it can be because the actual resolution process is subjective in nature. The smart contracts would never be able to actually resolve it themselves. You need humans somewhere in the loop to actually tell you like how this should be resolved or not resolved. And so that's sort of what we mean by a subjective oracle. In the case of an optimistic game, like an optimistic rollup, you don't need an oracle, you just need on-chain verification. You just throw gas at it and you compute the thing. But there's lots of things where you want a subjective oracle that'll give you like some data on chain that has a subjective element to it. So set inclusion, what tokens should be allowed or disallowed, maker governance, for example, that controls the DAI stablecoin is effectively a subjective oracle for set inclusion in the maker protocol. You can do the same thing for exclusion rules, like if you wanted to do like banning users from submitting proposals if they haven't done anything, or if they've broken rules, or like if people are submitting NFTs to an NFT protocol but they're copyrighted, they might get banned. And in order to like make banning actually work, you need something like BrightID as well, which is kind of cool. You can also use it for like event resolution. So like Augur is another example of an oracle that like takes subjective information and puts it on chain. So Celeste sort of fits in that zone. And we kind of think of it as sort of a framework for these types of games where there's this action proposed, the action gets challenged, there's a settlement process that could happen, or there's a dispute process that happens. And when the dispute process happens, we have a series of adjudication rounds where people that have staked honey get drafted to review the like context of the dispute, like the information about it, the action, the arguments for why it should be one way or the other. And they essentially vote, and we take the plurality opinion of those voters as the resolution, and then it can be appealed until everybody gets selected. And the cool thing, and the reason that we're using BrightID for this, is we don't want those decisions to come down to who has the most stake. We use stake in terms of like capital to ensure that there's like some incentive, there's some skin in the game. But because we've limited the amount of stake that people can use, we're trying to get a large decentralized group of people that you don't know to participate in the process and not be overwhelmed by whales voting. Yeah, so that's the basics. I can talk about a few other things on here. I have the BrightID slide in here. We've got this like keeper dashboard where people will be able to stake and kind of do everything that they need to do. This will be the like main interface for participating in the protocol. So you'll see all your balances, upcoming tasks, dispute lists, and this is all like a fork of Aragon Court. So if you've used Aragon Court, a lot of this stuff will be really familiar. And we'll have two types of rewards for people that are participating. There'll be a staking reward that you get that's funded via OneHive's common pool proposals on a monthly basis, and it's like a lottery. If you stake, you earn those rewards kind of proportionally to what you've staked for the course of a month, and it gets re-upped as often as people vote to re-up it. That might change in the future, but it was a good enough place to start. But essentially, you'll get those rewards passively just for staking honey and participating in the protocol. And the really cool thing about this is that because, again, we've limited it by BrightID, those staking rewards over time should actually improve the Gini coefficient of the honey token. So like, unlike a UBI or like the faucet thing that we were experimenting with previously, we're actually asking people to be on call, perform work, be ready to do things, but we're also giving them much more significant rewards. And the hope is that'll actually increase the like legitimacy, increase the distribution, not increase the distribution, but even out the distribution over time. So a lot of proof of stake based protocols have this tendency for stake to concentrate, because you earn a return on your stake, and so the more stake you have, the more the return you get, and just over time it concentrates and concentrates. With this, at least we've stymied that with Bright ID, and it actually should have the opposite effect. We should be kind of trending more towards a Gini coefficient of 0 as opposed to a 1. And we have this idea of a community covenant, and this is kind of why we like prioritize this, why we've been working on it. We didn't really consider the OneHive DAO complete until we had a way to sort of encode our intentions for the community and the protocol over the long term, because autonomous technology is like kind of crazy. Once it's like out there and it has life of its own, it might do things that you don't really agree with and don't want to be associated with. And so it was really important for us to kind of put that check in place. So if somebody buys a bunch of honey, they can't go do evil stuff, because we have Celeste and we can dispute those proposals, and we can prevent that bad stuff from happening. And so this is what the new OneHive voting interface will look like. It looks very similar to the current one, but every proposal will have this disputable action tab on the right. And this is where you can kind of see the challenge status. So if somebody's submitting like a vote that violates the covenant, you can come in and challenge it. That'll prevent the vote from getting executed until the challenge is resolved. You can review the details, but otherwise it should be very, very similar. You just have this like extra component. And then when you challenge actions, you have to provide some information, provide some justification for the challenge that gives the people that are participating as keepers in Celeste some understanding of like why you're challenging this, and makes it easier for them to kind of piece things together and come to an appropriate resolution. We expect people will be kind of debating these sorts of things on Discord and Discourse, and each time there's like an event like this, which hopefully should be relatively rare, there'll be like a kind of community consensus. So even if you're not drafted as like a keeper, you're probably going to like know that these things are happening, and they're going to set precedents and kind of collectively determine our understanding of sort of what's appropriate and not appropriate in these situations. But in the event a dispute happens, you also will, and you get drafted to resolve a dispute, you'll also earn dispute fees for your time and the risks that you're taking on. So you get those passive rewards, and then you also will get paid each time you get drafted for a dispute as well. Yeah, this was from a little while ago, so we were still testing on Rinkeby. I think some of the people here participated, so thanks for that. Yeah, we should be switching over, assuming everything goes smoothly on Saturday. So people should be able to stake and start disputing things. Hopefully not just for fun, because it'll cost money. But yeah, that's the Celeste kind of overview. If there's any questions there.
Yeah, I definitely have a question from that. So disputes happen rarely, and we're trying to incentivize and grow a large pool of potential jurors to draw from. How do we so if someone, how do we avoid maybe like people in the pool that maybe don't have any intention of actually serving in the jury, or maybe being like totally uneducated about what that means? Is there like some plan to like help people practice being a jury member, or to keep like check up on the people in the pool to make sure that they're actually still alive and able to participate, or how do you manage that since it happens so rarely, a dispute?
Yeah, I mean, I expect relative to the like interactions disputes to be rare, but over time, as we have more integrations, disputes won't be that rare. They'll just be rare proportional to the amount of people that are like proposing actions, right? In most cases, when you propose an action, you want there not to be a dispute. And if everything is working nicely and everybody knows it's going to work, nobody tries to submit actions that are invalid. And it's only when there's like a question that it wouldn't be. So ideally, disputes are rare, but there's still like a significant number of them just because we've got lots of integrations over time. That like if you're participating, you kind of expect that you're going to get drafted occasionally. And when you do get drafted, you can get slashed if you don't vote, if you just don't even show up, or if you don't spend the time to like figure out what you should be voting and you're like voting randomly, you're very likely to get slashed. And if we end up drafting, because the first appeal period, you draft 3 participants or 3 slots. And if for whatever reason they're all like inactive and they don't vote, you have the opportunity to appeal the ruling, and you basically like select a larger set of jurors, and you can do this up to 4 times. And by the 4th time, you're selecting everybody to participate. And so in the event that like the population of jurors is inactive or not participating, you would expect to see 1 or 2 rounds of appeals go through, and it takes a little bit longer to resolve the dispute. But you end up selecting everybody, and then everybody who's inactive gets slashed. So it should sort of automatically adjust in that regard. And the more inactive people they are, you would expect to see more appeals, which is unfortunate. Like we don't want to see a lot of appeals because it takes longer to resolve disputes. It costs more, but it's there so that like it can flush out those people that are inactive and force them to lose money.
Right. So I think that slashing is obviously critical to this functioning well. And maybe people who don't understand the slashing out up front, once they get slashed once or twice, they'll be like, oh, this is, I actually have to pay attention to this.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the idea, is if you have a direct incentive like that, even if like it doesn't work perfectly, you have to train people. They'll learn pretty quick when they aren't like earning money. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. I mean, this is definitely a very much a novel like experiment. But Claros, I guess, would be the like longest running kind of comparable, and they're running on mainnet, and they haven't had tremendous issue with like inactivity. And the main difference in incentives here is that like you're limited by the amount of stake as an individual. So maybe that'll exacerbate that problem. I'm not sure. But I think there's good reason to think that it won't be a huge issue, especially after you've gone through a few times and people get all upset because they got slashed because they weren't paying attention. You're like, well, that's how it works. We told you, you got to pay attention. That's like why you're getting paid.
So if no one's gonna, I heard you say something at the end that when you were listing off Celeste's presentation, but the end of when you were listing off some of the cool new developments in OneHive that I had never heard of, which it had some, I can't remember the name of it, but it had something to do with like crafting a really nice proposal or like some tool that's gonna like people get paid for helping to like craft a really like well-written proposal or something like that. What was that tool called? Could you talk more about that? Or
yeah, we're calling it quests. Like you go on a quest, there's a quest bulletin board where you can kind of find things to do and people can post them. But yeah, what we were kind of thinking about is the like traditional bounty model is really hard. Like it's common in the like DAO space to, or even the open source place to do bounties, but it's often really difficult because the core team kind of has to spend time defining the bounty and scoping it. That's not always it's not an insignificant amount of work to do, and sometimes it's easier to do it yourself. But you end up having like a bottleneck there. And then you also have sort of this bottleneck in terms of if you're a person looking to do work or do bounties, if you do submit work for it and then the like core team or whatever declines it because they don't think it's up to their standards or something like that, you also kind of have this like weird problem where you've already done the work. And so like that dynamic is kind of like not perfect. But we found in the like OneHive ecosystem, we have like a very kind of bottom up process for getting things done. We've got a lot of people that have lots of cool ideas, but not necessarily development skills to like execute on them. And so like the current proposal process puts a lot of emphasis on like having a reputation in terms of actually delivering. We don't want to like fund things for random people that like we don't know and they don't have the skills to actually execute on it, and there's not a lot of accountability. But with Quest, people will be able to be like, I want to see this happen. These are sort of the deliverables, and we should fund this effort from the proposal, but you don't have to trust me that it's going to get done to these standards. You have to trust Celeste effectively, and other people can come in and kind of perform the work. And it just gives us like an extension, like almost like an escrow type thing, and more flexibility. And we like the idea of being able to incentivize proposers as well as executors. It's like separating that responsibility. So it's not always the person that is going to actually perform the work or execute on the thing that has to submit the proposal. You can put up proposals for interesting like roadmap items or interesting things that would be really, really helpful, but you actually can't do yourself. And that should be cool. But yeah, it's pretty flexible. It's still a work in progress. We actually had a team of students take it on as sort of their capstone project. And so they've got like the kind of beta, and hopefully we'll see that sort of integrated with Celeste fairly soon after launch, but then it'll probably need some polish. But yeah, I think that's an exciting extension to sort of the proposal flow.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Let me see if I don't see any questions in the chat. Does anyone want to raise their hand and ask Luke a question about anything that he's talked about so far?
A question about like staking with Celeste is like, I think anytime you start talking about staking, people instantly think about returns. But like you already touched on the fact that like you have to actually do something on top of just like putting up funds. But like what are like potential returns, and are there any parameters around what you can stake?
Can you repeat the second part in terms of parameters around what you can stake?
Yeah, is there a minimum you can stake and a maximum you can stake?
Yeah. So there is a minimum because we kind of have like a slot mechanism for selecting participants, similar to how you have a minimum of 32 ETH to stake in Ethereum. So the minimum is relatively low. It's like less than 1 honey. And the max scales based on how much of the total supply of honey is staked. And I think the max in the case where there's no stake in the system at all is somewhere around 33 honey, I think. And that decays linearly down to like 3 honey in the case where everything's staked. So we expect that like the max stake will probably end up being like 10 to 15 honey, which is like not insignificantly like that's a pretty big chunk, but it's like relatively small compared to like whales staking in the protocol. So yeah, don't quote me on those exact numbers. They're in the contracts to verify, and they can be updated via a governance decision over time. So we'll kind of see once people start staking in the system, what the like participation rate is. The actual returns, the module for like giving staking rewards is like on a month-long period, and so like staking rewards go out every month, and the amount that gets distributed will be funded via conviction proposals. So the like OneHive community will kind of decide on the staking rewards for a month, and they'll be able to kind of determine what the appropriate ROI is, depending on like whether they think there should be more people staking or less people staking. That might be automated over time. Like if we model it and we want like a very specific target. The other interesting thing there is we're using like a probabilistic model for the staking rewards. So if you stake, we pick like a block that snapshots during that like 1 month period. And if you happen to be like staked at that time, you get the like monthly rewards proportional to that, and you can claim them. It's not like a continuous thing. So if you've only been staking for part of the period, there's like a chance that you'll get nothing and a chance that you'll get like paid for the entire period, which is a little bit strange, but it like works out to be like the equivalent expected value over time, and drastically reduces the implementation complexity in terms of like the smart contract implementation.
Yeah, so we have some other questions about what Celeste can be used for. What kind of disputes does Celeste normally deal with? And I think you answered this, but maybe because it's being asked again, maybe you could answer it again, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't launched, so there isn't really a normal. The initial like main integration is going to be through these governance proposals. So validating whether like a community like OneHive, and I mentioned Gardens, we're going to make it so that you can have other communities using the same sort of model that will have this integrated as well, but they'll have like a like constitution or like founding document or set of rules for moderating proposals. So if you come in and you make a proposal to a community to just give yourself some money for no reason, people can challenge that and be like, this isn't part of the community's values. This is an appropriate use of proposals. We can't like downvote you, and you may be able to get enough stake to like pass your proposal, but it's invalid and we're going to dispute it and prevent it from happening. So that's one example. And that's sort of like in the use cases I mentioned, that's sort of like the inclusion set principle. But we would expect to use it for like curated sets. There's this project in OneHive called Canon. It's like curated sets of NFTs. We have some DeFi projects like Honeyswap and Agave that use token lists as like the standard for like what tokens to show up on the UI, what are the default like tokens that are considered as like the default available. And so we can use Celeste to determine the rules for submitting tokens and challenging ones that like have invalid information. The types of disputes are not like legal disputes. They generally have to have public information because you want to be able to have a random set of people that are not subject matter experts be able to look at it and kind of come to a conclusion on like what is the like common sense opinion for how this thing should be handled. We're not trying to have everybody that stakes in Celeste be like a engineer with deep solidity expertise. We're not trying to have everybody that stakes in Celeste be a attorney that's handling privileged information or anything like that. We want people to basically be able to serve as moderators without like a tremendous amount of like subject matter expertise. They'll have like the context, they'll have the arguments, they'll have people on Discord kind of explaining things, but ultimately like they're going to make a decision based on kind of what's common sense to them given the situation.
Yeah. So you showed what was it called? Not a charter. There's another word you used for OneHive that was going to help to guide the decisions for whether there should be a dispute or not on a choice.
Covenant.
A covenant. That's the word you used. Yes. So do you have a link to that covenant? Is that something that has been either ratified or like is it pretty well established or is it still like being fleshed out? The one for OneHive.
Yeah, so let me drop a link in the Zoom here. The actual like covenant that we're using as the source of truth in the DAO is on IPFS, but I don't have that link handy. It'll be in the UI, and you'll have to sign it before you can submit proposals. But we've been using the same sort of covenant, and it could use some cleanup and editing. We had like an open kind of, this is being drafted on the forum for like months, without a tremendous amount of like really discourse or editing, and it could use more attention. It's possible for us to upgrade it via governance over time. It's a bit tricky on like the technical side to do so, but it's also pretty vague in general. A lot of it was inherited from the open source contributors covenant. If anybody's familiar with that, it's a really common tool used in open source communities for moderation of like public spaces. And like interaction patterns. So basically the covenant for OneHive is, this is what we're doing. This is sort of our like our kind of mission. This is how enforcement works. And here's this sort of like set of expectations for how we interact with one another to make sure that the space is sort of inclusive and friendly and like a harassment-free zone. And yeah, so oh, sorry, Carlos, I sent the message directly to you. I'm not sure how that happened.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for relaying it.
Okay, great. Yeah, Wiki OneHive org community covenant. So that's where we can look at the covenant. And yeah, it looks really good. And so in building off of that question, so Mehdi Ali asks, imagine a charity. So imagine a school in a specific location that wants to be built. In other words, they want to use some OneHive funds for this charitable endeavor to build a school, let's say in some part of the world. Now, I think if that proposal went up, we would read the covenant, the OneHive covenant, and try to see if that type of proposal made sense or if it should be disputed. And so as kind of like a test exercise, what do we think on that one? Is that one that would probably get disputed if that came up as a proposal?
I have no idea, actually. I think it would be a really interesting test case. We've left the covenant relatively open-ended to allow like mostly just values-driven kind of decisions. So I could totally see a proposal like that. It's like fund this sort of charitable organization being totally valid. But depending on the like context, if it's like completely unrelated to anything we're doing, and the community feels like it's just extracting value for some other cause, even though it's a good cause, they might like make an argument based on the covenant that it shouldn't be allowed. And it would be up to like the Celeste like keepers to come to a resolution. And we might see sort of precedents be set over time and change over time as proposals come through, and there might be like nuances that emerge. But yeah, I'd be super curious in terms of like specific proposals kind of going through and sort of testing and seeing what happens and how that like changes the discourse. And we might find that like through that process, there might be like indications that we want to improve the covenant's wording over time to like be like, oh yeah, this went through because it passes the covenant as it is now. And that makes sense, but like maybe there's like a justification for trying to reword the covenant over time to address that.
Yeah,
And we'll see how
maybe, yeah,
that
sorry, go
happens.
ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I mean, it's just one of those things where like, it's unknown territory for us even. So this is very much a community driven thing that like, there's no answers to some of those questions until it actually happens.
Yeah, so since since the One Hive covenant is like you said, pretty general and pretty high level, maybe what we'll see is sort of a corpus of case studies, if you will, being built over time, where it's like, okay, we can refer back to the decision that the court made, you know, 6 months ago on something similar to this, and it was appealed, and then this was the ruling on it. And so if we look at like precedents, we can see that, okay, we don't normally fund this sort of thing, but maybe there's room to change that. But that so you could imagine it sort of building up something similar to a common law system to go along with the covenant, just based on, yeah, what people tend to agree on. But yeah, so who knows how that will turn out. But I don't know that it necessarily means that you have to keep updating the covenant, or how often you even need to change that, if it's meant to be sort of a general high level thing.
Yeah, I totally agree with regard to like that precedence history and like the interpretation of certain things, like being refined and changing over time. That I think is one of the reasons we wanted it to be relatively open-ended and not just set a set of like very specific rules that like may be completely irrelevant in like 3 months, right?
So you talked about the vote that's being passed right now being like a major change to the DAO structure, and Celeste is a part of that. What other pieces are being passed in this vote?
So the other really big piece is the change to the issuance policy. We have a dynamic issuance policy being implemented within the vote. So rather than having like a fixed issuance rate that goes in the common pool, it tries to target a specific ratio, and will mint tokens or burn them from the common pool to maintain that ratio, kind of like a proportional controller. So that's a big change. We also included the BrightID register app in the DAO. So what we use to make sure that we've got like an on-chain verification source, and that can be upgraded via the DAO or adjusted via governance. Previously, we just had a standalone contract for the faucet. So that was a slight like integration. The disputable aspect of the votes is new, and the decision-making process is slightly different. So disputable voting replaces dandelion voting, which is what we're using to make this decision in the current DAO. And there's some different incentives there. Like dandelion voting can only do votes sequentially, and you get locked in if you vote yes. And you've got that like execution delay, and it's kind of modeled after like Moloch's voting system, where you get locked in and other people can sort of rage quit by like selling or like exiting in response. And that's sort of like a rudimentary dispute resolution system when you don't have another dispute resolution system to work on. So with the new DAO, we've got disputable voting, which allows delegation. We haven't implemented that in the front end yet, but it's there in the contract, so we can later. And it allows votes to be kind of done simultaneously. It doesn't lock you in if you vote yes, because you can always raise a dispute. And it has this quiet ending period. So if the result of the vote flips near the end of the vote, it extends the duration of the vote. So this is kind of a nice little feature that we couldn't have done with dandelion voting because it's all sequentially and the order matters a lot. And that ensures that like if there's a controversial vote and nobody's like actually participating, but it flips at the end, people can come back and add more support until you get like a kind of quiet ending sort of consent period. I think DAO Stack was the first like DAO framework that implemented some sort of quiet ending period. But that'll be part of the decision-making process as well. And I think that's it. I think that those are the major upgrades.
Great.
Oh, one other one. We have an agent instead of a vault, so we can interact with external contracts via decisions, which we could have sort of done before if we like added an agent to that DAO, or like if we used the voting app, but it was not easy. And now the agent is just the vault.
Is that the Aragon agent?
Yeah. So the DAO is based on the Aragon OS framework.
Right.
Still.
I did, just when we've used the agent, it's tough because we just have to trust that the person that wrote the thing is correct.
Yeah.
The vote is like execute undefined string. Okay, Adam, I hope you wrote that right.
Yeah. So that it's actually with any of the decisions that you see on air, like the things that are called decisions, as opposed to proposals in the OneHive DAO, it looks it looks the same way. It's like hard to, you can't just look at it and know exactly what you're voting on. You have to start unpacking it. And so
Is it lookable?
Is what?
Like, if
yes,
someone technical does want to see the actual code, can they go see it?
Yeah. So I mean, you can look at the vote data on BlockScout and like get the information. We also display the RADspec string. So the unknown function, at least it gives you the contract address and the function signature that you're calling, and the data. I think that there can be like improvements that are made there. And I've had this like project in the back of my head for a while for a RADspec registry that is basically applying right now to get RADspec descriptions and contracts. You kind of add them as comments in Solidity files. But once you've deployed something, or if somebody deployed something and it didn't have RADspec support from the get-go, it just doesn't have it. But you could create like a curated registry on chain that applies RADspec like strings to different functions and use that to display in the UI. You're still trusting that the registry is accurate, but it's certainly helpful for people that aren't digging directly into the bytecode. But in the case of like this upgrade, for example, because like you look at the decision vote, you see like a bunch of stuff happening that looks kind of scary. Even with the like RADspec that's like not calling an undefined function, but it's calling like defined functions using the RADspec, you kind of have to like piece it together still. Like if you're not a developer, that's hard. So writing like a human readable like proposal on the forum that steps through the process so people can themselves go through and verify and kind of evaluate, I think is really important from like a transparency perspective.
Yeah, luckily, OneHive is designed to have very few decisions of these so-called decisions and more of these proposals, which are much easier to understand, and especially with Quest will probably be even nicer to look at. So most of those decisions are meant to be really rare. It's only like in the case of like a smart contract upgrade or something like that you need to resort to.
Yeah, we actually don't even have an interface right now for creating decisions. You have to be a technical user because they're only really intended for like these technical migrations. And generally speaking, we want those to be like things that have been planned for a long time, have everybody like been reviewed, tested on testnet. Like they're if I could remove decisions entirely from the protocol and feel like it was going to stand the test of time, I would. But I think that we're still too early to like calcify completely. But we just do our best to basically use that as a very, very like last resort. And then the issue of like decoding the bytecode for everybody or teaching people how to do that is less of an issue because it's so infrequent. You can be like, yeah, here's how you can go look on Block Scout. Here's the thing. Like, it's going to be dense in terms of information that you have to do, but we're not going to do this again for a year. Right.
Nice. Okay, I think we need to close the recording, but I would like to say thank you so much, Luke, for coming. We love learning about governance and seeing what OneHive is doing, and it's really exciting. And I personally can't wait to get more involved with Celeste as a juror, and you know, start helping out with some of these disputes and decisions. So it's very exciting, and the other stuff that you mentioned too. So thank you so much for being here. We're going to stop the recording, and we'll have the chance to make some Bright ID connections. So thank you.
Awesome.